The boardroom on the 18th floor of Ashford Medical Group smelled like fresh leather and old money. 14 members of the board sat frozen in their high-backed chairs, coffee growing cold in porcelain cups none of them remembered pouring. At the head of the mahogany table, Victoria Ashford's face had drained to the color of the marble walls behind her, her manicured fingers gripping the armrest as though the room itself might tilt and throw her from it. At the front of the room, a man stood before a 73-inch display screen pulsing with data visualizations in crimson and gold. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been waiting in a closet for exactly this moment. His voice carried no anger, no tremor, nothing but the steady authority of someone who had memorized every number on that screen because each one represented a human life discarded. In 6 years, 73 Black and Latino employees were terminated with an average disciplinary processing time of 2.3 minutes, compared to 5.1 minutes for white employees facing identical violations. He paused, letting the arithmetic of injustice settle into the silence. Victoria's lips parted. Her eyes traveled from the data to the man's face, and recognition crashed into her like a wave breaking against stone. You're the security guard. The screen cut to black. White text emerged against the darkness. 6 weeks earlier. Marcus Thompson's alarm was set for 6:15, but his body woke at 5:47 every morning. Trained by 3 years of functioning on the knife edge between exhaustion and responsibility. The apartment was small, 700 square feet in Eastside for $800 a month, and every surface told a story of careful survival. On the kitchen table, an electric bill for $127, a medical debt notice for $4,200, from the hospital where Denise had spent her final weeks before the cancer took her, and a phone displaying a bank balance of $62.41. He moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of a man who had turned single parenthood into a precise science. Lunch bag packed with a peanut butter sandwich and apple slices cut into stars, because Maya insisted stars tasted better than circles. He'd skipped his own lunch for 2 days to save $3.50 for the baking soda she needed for her science fair volcano project, but she would never know that. Some sacrifices were only meant to be carried by the person making them. Maya appeared in the hallway at 6:20, right on schedule, clutching a stuffed Tyrannosaurus Rex she'd named Professor Rex, with the absolute certainty that only 7-year-olds possess. Her gap-toothed smile could make him forget every bill on that table, every sleepless night, every moment he'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how one person could be expected to fill the shape of two. "Daddy, I remembered the baking soda goes in today. Mrs. Patterson says my volcano is going to be the best one." His hand found the top of her head, smoothing a braid that had come slightly loose during the night. "I already packed it in your bag, Princess. Professor Rex can supervise the eruption." She giggled, and the sound was worth more than anything that bank balance could ever represent. The morning routine compressed into its familiar rhythm. Walking Maya to Jefferson Elementary through streets still shaking off the dawn chill. Kneeling to zip her jacket to the chin. Pressing a kiss to her forehead that she pretended to wipe away, but never actually did. Watching her disappear through the school doors with Professor Rex's tail poking out of her backpack like a small green periscope. Then the 47-minute bus ride across the city to Ashford Memorial Hospital, where Marcus Thompson transformed from a father into a ghost. The security uniform was 2 sizes too large, deliberately unflattering, designed to make the person inside it disappear into the architecture. He changed in the basement locker room alongside Jerome Carter, a 50-year-old black man who'd been walking these halls for 12 years and had learned to read the institution's moods the way sailors read weather. Jerome's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "New CEO's doing a night inspection tonight. Victoria Ashford herself. Keep your head down, Marcus. She doesn't appreciate staff who draw attention." The pause that followed carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken experiences, especially our kind of staff. On the small shelf inside his locker, behind a spare uniform shirt, Marcus kept a framed photograph of Denise. 3 years since the cancer took her, Dia and Maya still asked every night before bed when Mommy was coming home. He had yet to find words honest enough and gentle enough to exist in the same sentence as an answer. He closed the locker and became invisible. The inspection arrived at 9:47 p.m. with the precision of a military operation. Victoria Ashford moved through the hospital's VIP wing like she owned the oxygen in the hallways, which, in a sense, she did. 12 hospitals across 4 states bore her family name. At her side walked Felix Drummond, the HR director whose 22-year tenure had made him less an employee than a load-bearing wall of the institution, and behind them trailed 3 department managers whose primary function appeared to be nodding. Marcus stood at his assigned post in the main atrium, posture straight, eyes forward, to the model of professional stillness. Victoria stopped 6 feet from him, close enough for him to catch the scent of perfume that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She didn't look at him. She looked through him, addressing Felix as though Marcus were a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room. "Why is there a security guard stationed in the VIP lobby? Our clients pay $2,800 per night. The aesthetic needs to be immaculate." Felix nodded, already making a note on his tablet. "I'll reassign immediately, Ms. Ashford." Then she turned, and her eyes landed on Marcus for the first time. Not on his face, on his uniform, his skin, the sum total of everything she had already decided he was. "There are directional signs posted throughout this floor. I assume you can read them. Security personnel are stationed at the rear entrance." Marcus held her gaze for exactly 1 second, not long enough to be confrontational, just long enough to memorize the precise shade of contempt in her expression. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked toward the side corridor with the measured steps of a man who understood that dignity was not something anyone could take unless you opened your hands and offered it to them. Around the corner, out of sight, Nurse Linda Chen stood at the nursing station with her pen frozen above a patient chart. She'd worked at Ashford Memorial for 15 years, and she had witnessed that exact interaction in 100 different variations, aimed at 100 different people who shared nothing in common except the color of their skin. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had a 12-year-old son and a mortgage, and silence had become the price of keeping both. 31 minutes later, the server room alarm on the 3rd floor shattered the building's quiet efficiency. The overnight IT technician, a young man named Derek who looked barely old enough to vote, was pacing outside the door with his access badge trembling in his hand. "Unauthorized access alert on Terminal 3B. Someone's pulling patient records." Marcus happened to be passing on his rounds. He stopped, glanced at the blinking panel, and spoke with the casual precision of someone identifying a familiar bird in a garden. "That's not an intrusion. Terminal 3B is running its automated backup cycle. Meditech EHR version 6.15 triggers a false positive when the backup overlaps with the audit log timestamp. Check event ID 4728. It'll confirm the backup hash matches the authorized schedule. Derek stared at him, then checked. Every detail was correct. From 20 feet down the corridor, Linda Chen watched the entire exchange over the rim of a paper coffee cup. The man Victoria Ashford had asked if he could read had just diagnosed a system error that the hospital's own IT department couldn't identify. Her voice was barely a breath. "Who are you?" Marcus offered a smile so slight it could have been a shadow. "Just security." His shift ended at 2:14 a.m. The bus didn't run that late, so he walked 22 minutes to the night bus stop on 7th and Franklin, then rode 40 minutes home through streets that belonged to no one at that hour. The apartment was dark. Maya was sleeping at Mrs. The Hendersons next door, the retired school teacher who watched her on Marcus's night shifts for a rate that was less a fee than an act of mercy. He didn't go to collect Maya. Not yet. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, pushed aside the electric bill and the medical debt notice, and opened a laptop that did not match anything else in that apartment. A MacBook Pro with military-grade VPN encryption, its screen glowing with the logo of Meridian Consulting Group, one of the country's foremost institutional investigation firms. The file was already open. Ashford Medical Group, Pattern Analysis. 3 months of patient observation and trust building had led to this 4th month of hard evidence collection. The numbers arranged themselves into a pattern so clean it could only be intentional, and 73 Black and Latino employees terminated across 6 years, disciplinary processing averaging 2.3 minutes versus 5.1, promotion rates of 4% against 31, 18 formal complaints filed with HR. Every single one had vanished like smoke through a closed window. Jerome's voice echoed in his mind. 12 years. Restructuring. 3 white guards hired the same month. Marcus added Jerome's name to the file. 74. Then he found something that made him stop breathing. Buried in the back end of the HR management system, invisible to anyone without the specific expertise to look for it, was an employee classification code. C7. It appeared on every terminated employee's file. It did not exist in any employee handbook, any onboarding document, any official policy. It existed only in the architecture of the system itself, a hidden tag that marked certain employees for limited advancement and expedited removal. Marcus leaned back in his chair. The kitchen faucet dripped. The medical debt notice rustled in the draft from the window that never quite sealed properly. This was not 6 years of one man's prejudice. This was infrastructure. Someone had built discrimination into the source code of this institution, and the timestamp on the original C7 entry read September 1994. 30 years. He closed the laptop and went next door to carry a sleeping Maya home. She murmured against his shoulder, arms tightening around Professor Rex, and he held her with the tenderness of a man who understood that the world waiting outside their apartment door had already started reaching for his daughter. He laid her in bed, pulled the covers to her chin, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Jefferson Elementary, sent at 11:18 p.m., but just now loading through his outdated carrier. Notification: an incident involving your daughter occurred at school today. Please contact Ms. Patterson before 8 a.m. Marcus stood in the blue glow of the phone screen, looking down at Maya's sleeping face, at the gap-toothed smile that had been the only thing keeping him whole for 3 years. Whatever had happened at that school had already happened. He couldn't undo it. But standing in that small room, With 30 years of institutional cruelty cataloged on his laptop and his daughter's unknown hurt waiting for him in the morning, Marcus Thompson understood with absolute clarity that this investigation had just become something no consulting contract could contain. This was no longer about 74 files on a screen. This was about the world his daughter would inherit. And he was not going to let that world remain unchanged. Ms. Patterson's classroom smelled like dry erase markers and apple juice, the universal scent of controlled chaos that every elementary school produces. Marcus arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes before the requested time, because punctuality was the only armor available to a black man walking into an institution where assumptions had already been made. Maya sat on a small plastic chair outside the principal's office. Professor Rex clutched against her chest like a shield, her eyes red and swollen in a way that told Marcus the crying had happened hours ago, but the hurt was still fresh. Ms. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who chose her words with the care of someone who had delivered difficult news to parents before and understood that precision mattered more than comfort. Mr. Thompson, during recess yesterday, a fourth grader named Kyle Brecker told Maya that her father works as a janitor because he isn't smart enough for a real job. He told her that people like your family don't become doctors or scientists. Maya refused to participate in science fair preparation for the rest of the day. Marcus felt the words land in his chest like stones dropped into still water, each ripple expanding outward into places he had spent 3 years trying to protect. He thanked Ms. Patterson, asked the appropriate questions about the school's response, and then knelt beside his daughter in the hallway, bringing himself to her eye level because the most important conversations in life should never be conducted from above. Maya's lower lip trembled. Kyle says security guards are for people who can't do anything else. Marcus took her hands, both of them fitting inside one of his with room to spare. Daddy chose this job, Princess. Choosing something doesn't mean it's all you can do. It means it's what matters right now. He paused, searching for the language that lived in the space between truth and what a 7-year-old heart could carry. Remember how Professor Rex has those tiny arms? Well, every kid in your class laughs about them. But T-Rex was the king of every dinosaur that ever walked the earth. Not because of his arms, because of what was inside his chest. She looked down at the stuffed dinosaur, then back at him. I still want to do the volcano, Daddy. You're going to make the best volcano Jefferson Elementary has ever seen. And I will be in that front row when it erupts. He walked her to her classroom door, watched her disappear inside with Professor Rex's tail swaying behind her, and then stood alone in the hallway for 11 seconds. He counted them. 11 seconds to feel the full weight of what had just happened, to acknowledge that the system he was investigating had reached through the walls of a hospital and found his daughter in a schoolyard. 11 seconds. And then he sealed it away behind the expression that the world required of him and walked to his car. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles pale beneath the dark skin. For 3 months, this had been a contract, a professional engagement between Meridian Consulting and Ashford Medical's board of directors. The evidence had been data points, statistical anomalies, patterns in a system built to be invisible. Now every number had Maya's face behind it. 18 floors above the hospital's main entrance, in an office designed to communicate authority through square footage alone, Victoria Ashford sat behind a desk that had belonged to her father before her. The morning sun caught the crystal awards lining her shelves, each one commemorating philanthropic contributions and community leadership, each one casting small rainbows across walls that held no photographs of the people those communities actually contained. Felix Drummond entered without knocking, a privilege earned through 2 decades of knowing where every institutional body was buried, largely because he had been the one holding the shovel. His face carried the particular tension of a man whose carefully maintained architecture was developing cracks. The board's external consultants at Meridian are requesting expanded access to HR systems. They're calling it a culture audit, but the scope has changed. They want employee termination records going back 10 years. Victoria's pen stopped moving. Who authorized expanded scope? Richard Yates, board chair's prerogative under Article 7.4 of the corporate charter. He didn't consult you because he wasn't required to. Her jaw tightened. Find out exactly what they're looking for. I want to know before they do. Felix nodded and left. In his own office 2 floors below, he closed the door, drew the blinds, and opened the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet that required 2 separate keys. Inside, 18 complaint files that had never been entered into the digital system, a USB drive containing 6 years of internal emails flagged for deletion, and a manila folder labeled in handwriting that was not his own. The handwriting belonged to Jonathan Ashford Sr., and the folder read Protocol, September 1994. Felix had inherited this drawer the way a priest inherits a confessional, understanding that some sins were kept not to be absolved, but to ensure they never surfaced. At that he powered on his personal laptop, disconnected from the hospital network, and began systematically moving files to an encrypted external drive. Whatever Meridian's consultants found, they would not find this. The next 3 weeks compressed into a rhythm that Marcus's body learned to endure, even as his mind cataloged every detail with the precision that had made him one of Google's youngest lead cybersecurity engineers before Denise's diagnosis had rearranged every priority in his life. Days belonged to Maya. Breakfast, school drop-off, homework help, bedtime stories about Professor Rex's adventures in a prehistoric world where the small creatures were always braver than the large ones. Nights belonged to the investigation. Week 1 yielded the badge access architecture. Every employee at Ashford Memorial carried an ID badge encoded with security clearances, but Marcus discovered a secondary classification layer invisible to standard HR interfaces. Employees tagged C7 were automatically excluded from promotion consideration workflows. Their performance reviews were routed to Felix Drummond personally, rather than through the standard departmental chain. Of the 112 current employees carrying the C7 tag, 109 were Black or Latino. The remaining 3 were white employees married to Black spouses. Linda Chen became his first internal source on a Tuesday evening when she found him examining a badge reader panel near the staff elevator. She had spent 2 weeks watching him, measuring the distance between who the uniform said he was and who the server room incident proved him to be. Her decision to speak cost her 14 minutes of standing in the corridor, arguing with her own survival instincts before courage won. I have something you need to see. Her voice carried the particular steadiness of someone who had already accepted the consequences. She handed him a flash drive. Every termination I've witnessed in 15 years. Names, dates, what they were told, what actually happened. 23 cases I documented personally because I knew HR would make them disappear. Marcus looked at the drive, then at her. You know what this means if they find out. I have a 12-year-old son. I think about his future every day. And every day I stay silent. And I'm telling him the world is supposed to work this way. Week 2 brought the voices. Marcus contacted 12 of the 73 recently terminated employees, conducting recorded interviews with full consent in living rooms and kitchen tables across the city. Patricia Williams, an 18-year veteran nurse with 0 disciplinary incidents, sat in her apartment surrounded by framed commendations from patients whose lives she had helped save. They told me I wasn't a cultural fit. 18 years, Mr. Thompson. I delivered over 400 babies in that hospital, but a new nurse, 6 months in, miscalculated medication dosages 3 separate times, and they promoted her to charge nurse. James Rodriguez, a surgical technician who had trained 11 of his eventual replacements over 8 years. It showed Marcus the job posting that appeared on Indeed 14 days after his termination. His exact position, identical responsibilities, $12,000 higher in salary. They didn't eliminate my role. They eliminated me. Week 3 revealed the depth that turned a corporate discrimination case into something that would keep federal prosecutors awake at night. Marcus cross-referenced Ashford Medical's public filings with their internal HR data and found a $47 million fracture running through the center of everything. The hospital chain had received federal diversity grants and Medicare reimbursement bonuses predicated on documented workforce diversity initiatives. The applications cited hiring targets, mentorship programs, and promotion pathways that existed only on paper. Every quarterly diversity report submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services for the past 11 years contained fabricated statistics. This was not merely discrimination. This was fraud against the federal government, punishable under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Marcus sat at his kitchen table at 1:17 a.m., the laptop's glow painting blue shadows across the unpaid bills, and called Richard Yates on the encrypted line Meridian had provided. It goes back 30 years. The C7 code was implemented in September 1994 by Jonathan Ashford Sr. Felix Drummond has maintained and expanded it since 2003. 340 or more employees affected across all 12 hospitals. And Richard, there's $47 million in federal funds received under false diversity certifications. This is DOJ territory. The silence on the other end lasted long enough for Marcus to hear the older man's breathing change. Does Victoria know about the code? I have no evidence she knows about C7 specifically. Drummond kept it buried in system architecture that requires my level of expertise to even locate, but she created the environment that allowed it to continue. That distinction will matter legally, but it doesn't make it less her responsibility. Yates exhaled. How much more time do you need? I have enough for the board presentation, but I need access to a physical storage room in the basement. Room B12. Drummond keeps hard copies there, and digital evidence can be challenged. Paper can't be claimed as a system error. Felix Drummond was not a stupid man. He had survived 22 years in institutional power by developing the predatory alertness of an animal that knows it is both hunter and hunted. Security footage from the third-floor server corridor showed Marcus Thompson present at 11:47 p.m. on a night when his patrol route placed him on the ground floor. A background check that Felix ran personally, outside normal HR channels, returned results too clean for a man working an $11 an hour security job. No criminal record, no employment gaps longer than 8 months. An address in a neighborhood where people lived not by choice, but by arithmetic. Victoria's voice through the phone was ice and authority in equal measure. What, you're telling me a security guard is the leak? I'm telling you, he's not what he appears to be. I recommend immediate termination. Code SP2847. Failure to adhere to assigned security protocols. Do it today. Marcus arrived for his Thursday night shift to find his badge deactivated at the entrance. An HR assistant he had never met handed him a manila envelope containing a termination letter citing a security protocol violation that had been invented sometime between Felix's phone call and the printing of the document. 12 minutes from functioning employee to erased. The efficiency was almost admirable. He sat in his car in the parking structure, engine off, watching the hospital lights through the windshield. The termination didn't surprise him, and he had contingency plans for exactly this scenario. What surprised him was how much it still stung to be discarded by an institution that had never seen him as human enough to warrant a real reason. His phone rang. Maya's voice, sleepy and small, carried through Mrs. Henderson's phone from across the city. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" "Soon, Princess. I promise." He ended the call and sat with the silence. $800 in rent due in 9 days. $62 in the bank. No paycheck coming. The math of survival had been brutal before. Now it was impossible. But the evidence was not in that building. The evidence was on his laptop, on Linda's flash drive, in the recorded voices of 23 witnesses, and in the digital architecture of a system that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 decades. Well, if they could take his badge, they could not take what he had already found. 5 days later, Linda Chen called at 11:14 p.m. Her voice was breathless, the sound of someone who had just done something that could never be undone. "Felix left early tonight. Family emergency," they said. "I used my nursing access to get to the basement level. Room B12, Marcus. 30 years of paper files. Termination records with handwritten notes. Promotion denials with C7 stamps. And grant applications with diversity statistics that don't match anything in the real system. I photographed everything I could in 19 minutes before security rotation. I'm sending you 237 images." Marcus downloaded the files and spent 3 hours organizing them into the evidentiary framework Meridian's legal team had prepared. At 4:22 a.m., he sent a single encrypted email to Richard Yates with the subject line, "Evidence complete. Ready for board presentation. Request emergency session." The reply came at 6 a.m. "Emergency session approved. Monday, 9 a.m. Boardroom, 18th floor." 3 days. Marcus had 3 days to prepare the presentation that would determine whether 73 families received justice or whether 30 years of institutional cruelty would continue to operate behind glass doors and diversity awards. He pulled on his jacket and walked to Mrs. Henderson's apartment to collect Maya for their Saturday morning routine. Pancakes, cartridge drawings at the kitchen table, and the quiet fiction that everything was normal. Maya appeared in the doorway with Professor Rex under one arm and a crayon drawing under the other. "Daddy, look, I drew the volcano for science fair. It has real lava." The lava was orange crayon pressed so hard it had cracked through the paper. Marcus studied it with the seriousness it deserved. "That's going to be magnificent, Princess." She climbed into his lap, small and warm and trusting, and he held her with arms that would spend the next 72 hours building a case to change the world she would grow up in. "Daddy, are you scared?" The question landed with the surgical precision that only children possess, cutting through every layer of composure to the raw thing underneath. Marcus pressed his lips to the top of her head and breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "A little bit. Yeah? That's okay." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as though she were explaining a rule of the universe she had discovered independently. Professor Rex says being scared means you're about to do something important. Marcus smiled against her braids and felt something shift in his chest, a gear engaging, a door closing on doubt and opening onto whatever Monday morning would bring. Professor Rex is the smartest dinosaur I've ever met. 72 hours. The kitchen table was cleared of bills and covered in printed slides, evidence summaries, and legal citations. Maya slept in her room with the door cracked open so the hallway light could reach her, and Marcus worked through the night with the focus of a man who understood that the difference between justice and failure was preparation. Sunday night, he stood in Maya's doorway and watched her sleep. Professor Rex had fallen to the floor, and he picked the dinosaur up and tucked it back under her arm. "Everything changes tomorrow, Denise," he whispered to the empty room, to the woman who existed now only in the shape of their daughter's smile and the ache behind his ribs. "I'm going to make sure she inherits something better than what we were given." He closed his laptop, set his alarm for 5:47 a.m., and lay down in the dark, knowing that sleep would not come, and that it didn't matter. Some nights were not meant for rest. Some nights were meant for gathering the last of your courage and holding it close until dawn. Monday morning arrived not with drama, but with the ordinary cruelty of a 5:47 alarm and a coffee maker that took 3 attempts to start. Marcus dressed in the black suit he had purchased 4 years ago for Denise's funeral and had not worn since. It still fit, though the man inside it had been rebuilt entirely by the years between then and now. He knotted his tie in the bathroom mirror and noticed his hands were steady. Whatever trembling needed to happen had been spent during the sleepless night. What remained was granite. Maya was already at Mrs. Henderson's, dropped off at 5:30 with a kiss on the forehead and a promise that Daddy would pick her up early today. She had pressed Professor Rex into his hands at the door. "For luck, Daddy. He wants to go with you." The stuffed dinosaur now sat on the passenger seat of his 12-year-old Honda Civic as Marcus drove across the city toward the building that had fired him 8 days ago, and its tiny arms reaching forward as though pointing the way. The 18th floor boardroom was already occupied when Marcus arrived at 8:47. Richard Yates sat at the far end with Meridian's lead counsel, a woman named Diana Park, whose reputation in federal employment law had been built on the simple principle that institutions feared accountability more than they feared God. 14 board members filled the remaining chairs, each one summoned by emergency protocol and given no agenda beyond the word urgent. Victoria Ashford occupied the head of the table in a charcoal suit, her expression calibrated to project control. Felix Drummond sat 3 seats to her left, a leather portfolio closed in front of him like a shield he did not yet know was made of paper. At 9 a.m. precisely, the Marcus walked through the double doors carrying a laptop and a single flash drive. The room's collective attention landed on him with the weight of recognition, confusion, and in Felix Drummond's case, the first visible crack in 22 years of institutional composure. Victoria's voice cut through the murmur. "This man was terminated for security violations. He has no authorization to be in this building." Richard Yates stood. "Mr. Thompson is here at the board's invitation. He is a senior consultant with Meridian Consulting Group, formerly lead cybersecurity engineer at Google, engaged 4 months ago under Article 7.4 to conduct an internal investigation. His termination was executed by Mr. Drummond without board approval and based on a fabricated protocol violation. The word fabricated detonated silently across the table. Felix's hand moved to his portfolio, then stopped, as though the muscles in his arm had received a signal his brain was still processing. Marcus connected the laptop to the display screen and began with the voice he had spent 3 years perfecting in a different context, the bedtime story voice, calm and measured and impossible to interrupt, because every word carried the next one forward with the inevitability of a river. The first slide displayed a single number, 73. Below it, names, real names, not statistics. Patricia Williams, 18 years. James Rodriguez, 8 years. Jerome Carter, 12 years. The list filled the screen and required scrolling, each name accompanied by tenure, a termination reason, and the actual time HR spent reviewing their case. The shortest was 47 seconds. A woman named Dolores Vega, terminated after 9 years for repeated tardiness that the hospital's own badge system showed had never occurred. The second slide showed the C7 architecture. Marcus walked the board through the hidden classification layer with the technical precision of someone who had once built systems designed to protect the nation's largest technology company from threats far more sophisticated than a buried employee code. He showed them how C7 automatically excluded tagged employees from promotion algorithms, how it routed their reviews to a single individual, how it had been embedded in the system's foundational code in September 1994. Victoria's breathing changed when the date appeared. As her father had been CEO in 1994, the realization traveled across her face like weather crossing an open plain, transforming everything it touched. My father built this? Marcus did not soften the answer. The original architecture was implemented under Jonathan Ashford Sr.'s administration. It has been maintained and expanded by Mr. Drummond for the past 22 years. The third slide displayed the 18 complaints that had been filed and systematically erased, alongside Linda Chen's documentation of 23 additional cases she had witnessed personally. Photographs from room B12 filled the screen. Filing cabinets containing 3 decades of paper evidence, handwritten notes in margins confirming deliberate suppression, promotion denials stamped with codes that existed nowhere in any official policy. Felix stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood with a sound like a match striking. This is stolen evidence. This man infiltrated our organization under false pretenses. Nothing here is admissible. Marcus let the outburst hang in the air for 4 seconds before responding. Every document was obtained through authorized board engagement or voluntary disclosure by current employees acting under federal whistleblower protections. Recorded interviews were conducted under one-party consent statutes. Digital evidence was accessed through Meridian's contractual systems authorization. Ms. Park can confirm full compliance with federal rules of evidence, Rule 901A, and chain of custody has been maintained throughout. Diana Park nodded once. Felix sat down. The final slide carried the number that transformed a discrimination case into a federal matter. $47 million in diversity-linked federal funding received over 11 years. Every application supported by workforce statistics that did not exist in reality. Marcus displayed the submitted figures beside the actual data. The gaps were not ambiguities. They were fabrications, precise and repeated, designed to extract federal money under false pretenses. This constitutes a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, making false statements to federal agencies, and 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, systematic deprivation of civil rights under color of institutional authority. The evidence package has been prepared for DOJ referral pending board authorization. The room held a silence so complete that Marcus could hear the HVAC system cycling air through the vents above. Victoria sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the screen where her father's name appeared beside the code that had shaped the lives of hundreds of people she had never bothered to see. Felix made one final attempt to stand, and two board members on either side of him placed hands on his arms with a gentleness that was worse than force. Richard Yates spoke into the silence with the authority of a man delivering a verdict. Felix Drummond was terminated immediately, his files seized, and his case referred to the Department of Justice. Harold Briggs, the corporate counsel who had reviewed and approved diversity filings he knew to be inaccurate, was suspended pending investigation. A full independent audit of all 12 hospitals was authorized by unanimous vote. Security arrived to escort Felix from the building. He paused at the door and turned back toward Marcus with the expression of a man watching the walls of his own construction collapse inward. Whatever words he had intended to speak died somewhere between his lungs and his lips. Marcus met his gaze with the steady calm of someone who had never needed anger to make his point, because the truth, properly assembled, was louder than any voice could ever be. The room emptied slowly. Board members filed out in clusters of 2 and 3, speaking in the hushed tones of people recalibrating their understanding of an institution they thought they knew. Victoria remained seated. When the room was empty, except for Marcus and Diana Park, she stood and approached him with the unsteady deliberation of someone walking on ground that had just shifted beneath her. I need you to know that I didn't understand what I inherited, but I understand now that not knowing was its own kind of choice. Her voice fractured on the last word, but did not break. I intend to fix every part of this that can be fixed, and I intend to sit with the parts that can't. Marcus studied her for a moment, measuring the distance between performance and conviction, and found the latter. 73 families are owed more than intention, Ms. Ashford. They're owed proof. She nodded. Then they'll have it. 6 months collapsed into a montage of consequence and reconstruction. The DOJ investigation expanded beyond Ashford Medical to 4 additional hospital networks using similar classification systems. A revelation that made national news for 11 days before the cycle moved on, but left permanent changes in its wake. Felix Drummond was indicted on 14 counts of federal fraud and obstruction, eventually sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Victoria Ashford, cleared of direct knowledge of the C7 system but held accountable for institutional negligence, chose to remain as CEO and dismantle the architecture her father had built. She hired Ashford Medical's first chief diversity officer, a black woman named Teresa Grant, who had spent 20 years at the EEOC and did not smile during her introductory press conference because she understood that the work ahead was not a celebration, but a correction. 73 families received compensation averaging $85,000 each. A long-term restitution fund was established for the estimated 340 additional affected employees spanning 3 decades. Linda Chen was promoted to nursing director, a position she accepted not as a reward but as a responsibility. Marcus turned down the VP of Security position that the board offered with the particular enthusiasm of people trying to write a redemption narrative they could include in next quarter's press release. Meridian had paid his consulting contract in full, $95,000, that erased the medical debt, covered 8 months of rent, and funded a college savings account he opened in Maya's name with a starting deposit that would have seemed impossible 6 weeks earlier. He did not need Victoria Ashford's institution to validate what he already knew about his own worth. 1 year later, Jefferson Elementary's gymnasium smelled like baking soda and vinegar and the electric anticipation of 37 7- and 8-year-olds who had spent weeks building projects they believed would change the world. Maya stood beside a volcano that rose 18 inches from a plywood base, painted in layers of brown and red and orange that she had applied with the meticulous attention of someone who understood that details mattered. A first-place ribbon was already pinned to the display board behind her, royal blue with gold lettering. Marcus stood in the front row, exactly where he had promised he would be. Professor Rex occupied the chair beside him, propped upright so he could watch too. Maya launched herself into his arms with the force of a small planet achieving orbit. "Daddy, I won. Professor Rex won." He held her, this 7-year-old girl who had been the reason for everything, the compass that had pointed him through the darkest corridors of an institution built to diminish people who looked like them. "I knew you would, Princess. I promised, didn't I?" On the drive home, a new car that smelled like possibility instead of exhaust, Maya sat in the back seat with Professor Rex and her ribbon and the quiet satisfaction of a child who had been told she wasn't enough and had responded by building a volcano. "Daddy, do you think Mommy saw me win?" Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror, at the gap-toothed smile that was slowly filling in, and at the girl who was becoming the woman Denise would have been so proud to know. "She sees everything, Princess. She always has." The car passed a billboard on Route 9 that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Ashford Memorial Hospital, the letters read, beneath a new logo and a tagline that someone in marketing had probably labored over for weeks, but that meant something real to the 340 families who had waited decades for the world to acknowledge what had been done to them. Equal care, equal opportunity, equal worth. Maya didn't notice the sign. She was busy explaining to Professor Rex that next year's science fair project would involve rockets, and that rockets were even better than volcanoes because they actually went somewhere. Marcus smiled and kept driving. The road ahead was open, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't counting the miles to see if he could afford to reach the end of it. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive roaring. It arrives in a quiet man in a borrowed suit, standing in a room full of power, armed with nothing but the truth and the unshakable knowledge that his daughter deserved a world that matched the size of her imagination. Marcus Thompson never raised his voice. He never needed to. Dignity, it turns out, is the loudest sound in any room brave enough to listen.